I would have been 26. I don't know how I got old so fast, but yeah, 26 years old.
Yeah, you're young. I mean, look at me. Come on now. Be sweet. Be kind. The years have not necessarily been kind, but God has.
That's true. Um, but yeah, so at 26 years old, I had been married for several years. It wasn't the healthiest marriage. Um, uh, I had some events that took place. If you want me to launch into kind of a few things that
Whatever
happened.
you feel comfortable with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll hit some highlights
Okay.
for kind of what happened, a few things that happened in my life that were very significant in those 5 years, really,
Hmm.
around that time. But um, when I was 28 years old, uh, um, I got pregnant. Like I said, I was married at the time, and um, it's the normal like 20-week ultrasound, and I think they do ultrasounds more often these days, but back then, back in the old days,
Yeah, back in the old
um,
days when it was black and
yeah,
white television
that's
before the
right.
internet.
They only did ultrasounds. Really they started doing them around 20 weeks at halfway point through the pregnancy, and so um, we had an ultrasound, and unfortunately, it revealed that we were pregnant with a little girl, but it revealed that she had a fatal diagnosis. It's called thanatophoric dysplasia, which is a big word, but ultimately, what it really meant was that she would live in my womb until she was born, and then she would die shortly after. So I went another 12 weeks pregnant with her, and so gave birth at 32 weeks gestation. And she, uh, we got to hear her cry one solitary time. And then we just were able to hold her until she passed,
Hmm.
which was about an hour later.
Wow.
Um, so that was I mean, that's a very brief synopsis of a
So, so
extremely significant event, but
yeah. So tell me, if you don't mind me digging into some of this.
sure.
So, in how did you handle that news? I mean, what kind of thoughts, emotions, all that kind of stuff when you heard that at 20 weeks? What went through your mind? What did you wrestle with?
I mean, it was extremely shocking. I think that um, there's, I, I don't know, and I'm stuttering a lot, but at the time, I didn't know any women who had been through similar situations, or at least none that talked about it.
Yeah.
I may well have known, someone who had been through something similar, um, but they didn't talk about it, and um, but to be able to continue that child's life only inside my body
Yeah.
um, was a very different situation. You often hear about miscarriages, and that's, we know that that happens very often. This was not that situation. And this was not, this, it was very difficult to continue, um, shopping for maternity clothes because you need it. You can't fit your body into your clothes anymore, and you go to the store, and the sales attendant is like, "Oh, it's a beautiful time," and you're like, "You don't
Mm,
know my circumstances." And I'm much more nowadays. I'm much more cognizant of not everybody wants to talk about. everything that seems obvious going on in
Mm,
their life. Um, but the doctors didn't. They offered me one alternative, and that was abortion.
hmm
And I immediately said that's not going to happen. Um, and once I made that decision, they really didn't talk to me much anymore after that. They
hmm
said, you can come back and you can have ultrasounds, every few weeks, and we'll show you, how things are progressing. Uh, they didn't tell me what to expect. And thankfully, the internet did exist back then because what
Just
I
barely.
did, I know. We were pretty close. But thankfully, I was able to find an online group of women who, had either gone through the experience or were currently going through the experience, very similar, not necessarily exactly the same diagnosis, but many of them were. And I learned that there were some things that I needed to make decisions about for my own health. That
hmm
basically, the sicker that she got inside me, I would get sick as well.
Okay.
And I needed to make those decisions, and
Wow.
unfortunately, I was making them without the assistance of a doctor, um, because they only advised one,
hmm
one way of dealing with it.
Wow.
So, thankfully, I was able to go 12 more weeks, like I said,
hmm
with the pregnancy.
Now,
Um,
were you noticing that were you being affected physically? Were you feeling the effects of the baby's sickness as well?
right. Yeah, I was. She became unable to process the amniotic fluid the way that babies are supposed to. They're supposed to learn how to swallow
hmm
while they're in the womb, and she wasn't able to do that. And so I did have an overproduction of amniotic fluid.
Okay.
Um, and a few other things that were going on in my body. But and I did. I mean, even though I was only at 32 weeks, I was starting to have some light contractions as
Okay.
well. So, but ultimately, the decision was mine to to go ahead and have a C-section.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
So, so how did that, I mean, not that I want to go back and just dig up the past for that sake, but I, I have to imagine that there are going to be some ladies and men that would see this, and maybe it's not exactly the same thing, but they're going through some difficult time of, the possible diagnosis that a doctor has. And you and I both know that, God could change that in an instant, but he
Mhm.
decided not to for whatever reason. Uh, and in that, you had to walk through it. You guys had to walk through that. How did that affect you after that point, even considering, you know, and how did that affect your marriage if you want to get into that? Don't feel like
Sure.
you need to get into that, but
Well, I mean, um, as far as how it affected me personally, I think I um, a lot of people I think assume that uh, it's recalling my experience with my
mhm,
daughter that is always painful, and it's not. Um, I and I think that the absolute sole reason for that is that I know that my time with her is not completely gone.
yeah,
My time really has yet to begin. It's just deferred, and I will see her in heaven, and I will get to know her. And that for me, it just um, brings this comfort, absolute comfort of uh, you know she's with God. she is whole and healthy, and and not yeah, I've talked to many people who have lost babies, and they all think very differently about um, these types of things. But for me, I do not think of my daughter as a baby. I
Hmm.
think of her as a grown person.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think about going to heaven and being able to hold her in my arms, the way
Hmm.
that you would hold a baby. I'll
Yeah.
hold her in my arms like a hug. But she is fully developed. She is the way that any other person, I think, will be in heaven.
So just real quick, I insert this thought. When David had his affair with Bathsheba, and out of that came their first child, and the
Mhm.
child was, not given a good prognosis coming out of the womb, so it might have been very, very similar. And so he prayed and fasted for a week, wouldn't take any food, any water, anything, and God took the baby. And then he goes to Bathsheba, and there's a great scene in The Chosen that's on this. He goes to he's talking with Bathsheba, and she's mourning, and she's saying, "How can you now go and clean yourself and be ready and go and eat when our baby is gone?"
Right.
And his response is, and it's recorded in the Bible. He says, "Our child will not come to us again, but we will
Hmm.
go to him."
Yeah.
And that's what and that to me as well. I mean, we have Courtney's had miscarriages, and
Hmm.
that's the same thing. We will see that child. God knows why, but in his providence and in the hardship of this world and everything else, he saw fit that you would be the mom to that sweet little girl,
Right.
even for that the 32 weeks and then the couple of hours. And that little girl reaped the benefit of you being her mommy.
Yeah.
And yeah, that I mean, I get emotional thinking of you being able to hold her. That I want to be there.
Absolutely.
I'm asking God right now. I want to be there when that happens. I want to see you give her that hug for the first time in however many years at that point.
Right. No,
So,
it's actually it's even something that we've already talked about the fact that um I've adopted, this beautiful 8-year-old girl now, and we talk about it on a regular basis. And I'm like, it's not just me. Like, Maddie will get to know her sister, and
yeah, wow.
even that is really precious. It's like, Maddie wasn't just adopted into this family that's right here. She's been adopted to a greater family that she will get to know in heaven.
Wow. That puts so much stuff, that plants so many seeds in her heart and in her
Right.
mind that that can never be taken away. She's always going to carry that with her. Uh, if you don't mind, how did that affect your marriage?
Yeah. So, I have already mentioned that our marriage was, not the healthiest marriage. I would say, honestly, though, as far as, um, the steps that we went through, in the process, while I was still pregnant, um, and then everything that came after, we were very much on the same page.
Okay.
We allowed each other to grieve in the way that we needed to grieve. We were great support for each other. It was one of the things that we did well, um, as we were um,
Crisis can do
as we
that.
were going through that. Yeah,
You know,
yeah, and I
crisis,
and I
yeah,
know that it's definitely that is not the case,
yeah.
for everybody, but thankfully that really was a good part.
Well, I think part of that too, Wendy, was even in the midst of that, and I want to kind of drill down a little bit on this too. even in the midst of that, you had a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Right.
And how did this how did this fit in to all that? How did this affect your relationship with Jesus Christ?
Yeah. Um, you know, it it definitely strengthened it. There was I think that the best way to describe it would be that it gave me my relationship with Jesus gave me the hope that I needed to be able to continue with my life,
Hmm.
to be able to continue doing what needed to be done, to be able to accept that this had happened, was happening,
Hmm.
um, and that, you know, the scripture tells me that, God is looking out for me. God does have my best interests
Hmm.
at heart, and He will not harm me, you know, uh, in any way that He doesn't redeem,
Yeah.
right? So, and I believed all of that, and I still believe all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and I can definitely already see some of that.
Hmm.
But and that is something I will never fully understand. Maybe I will when I get to heaven. Um, but I think uh, I think that going through really difficult situations, um, it has always drawn me closer to God.
Hmm.
Um, I think, um,
Did you find did you find that it kind of got at least this is what I've kind of seen in my own life is that like when the hard times hit like that, it takes us back to what's really important in that, whatever it is that God's after that's really important. And it strips away the veneer of religion and the distance that we can put between us and God, and just, God's nice, God's good, God's sweet, God loves me. And that, that's true, but C.S. Lewis would say, yeah, but he's pretty dangerous too.
right.
He is not safe. And I think that's when you walk through the valley of the shadow of death like you did with your sweet little girl, it strips away all that stuff. And the fact that you would get on the other side of it, and I think that you're not only is your faith stronger, but the reality of who God is every day in your life, it changes it. It changed. So uh,
Absolutely.
so let's kind of move forward. I think that that's going to be incredibly helpful for folks
Mhm.
uh, to hear. And there might be even some ladies out there or men out there that say, man, I'd really like to talk to this lady. And this is what I'm going to say just in this. Look, you guys get my contact number, get my contact information, contact me. If you want to talk to Wendy, I will I will forward that on to Wendy, and then we can make arrangements from there. But uh, that way, you're not getting infringed on by thousands of people that are going to watch this every day. No. But I
Right.
do think that this is incredibly helpful for me, even.